Didn't
So
mean to interject there, Mark. You're on a roll. Keep on going.
okay. So anyway, I do want ideas from all of y'all on how we can push this project forward, this initiative forward. One of the things that Pete et al. Have identified is getting the cities to implement, or municipal authorities to implement, Solar App Plus to make it easier, faster, cheaper for people to get solar on their roofs or on their gazebos or wherever they're going to put it.
I don't mean to
And
inter I don't mean to interrupt, but there's a giant town hall meeting for about 100,000 customers for Tri-County Electric.
really,
Uh,
when
yeah,
is that?
that is happening on the 18th.
Okay, so
Uh,
okay, it's like
it's-
Wednesday.
right. I was the guy that got the CEO of Tri-County Electric fired for theft and fraud.
Oh, well,
Okay.
good for you.
Yeah. I also got the both chief technology officers fired too for two different data breaches where they left everybody's social security number, bank
Oh,
accounts, credit card numbers, everything exposed for 18 months on their website. And it was a front-facing SQL server that was a username that was anonymous space user with no password.
wow.
Can you please uh, give us your name in the chat so that we can know who you are? It's showing up as connecting.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I don't know why it's
Yeah.
doing that.
So who are you?
yeah.
First name is Steven. I'm Rory. Last name is Rory. I have a Facebook group. Here, let me give you the website, tricountycustomers.com. If you go to that website, it goes directly to my Facebook group. I'm also the one that replaced one of the board members. We had the first runoff election in 84 years. We had 4.5% participation in 2022. I got pissed off when I went to one of the solar meetings and on June 26th, I think it was, and the CEO started yelling at me and then threatening other customers inside the audience chamber. And I told him, "You fucked up. I go, you're gasoline on fire. You'll never put this out." And so I made it my mission in life to now replace every incumbent on the board and go forward from this point. We only had one challenger for the position, but now we're going to have three challengers for each incumbent. Um, but
Wow.
but the
I, lo I love
but
your advocacy, and we'd love to talk with you. I'm actually down in Henderson County with Trinity Valley Co-op, and I would love to be able to talk to you about that type of engagement down here. So let's continue this offline and go forward with our meeting.
Well,
yes,
and
I just wanted to. Sorry about all that. That's all.
no, no, you're good.
Oh,
I
you're
look,
great. You're
no,
great.
you're great. But Stephen, just FYI, some of our members may not be doing Facebook, and so I think there maybe is a better way for us to link up with you.
Right.
Um,
And the group is a public facing group, so it's basically like a web page. So even if you're not a Facebook member, you could read everything that's going on. You might not be able to participate if you don't have an account, but
mhm.
it's no different than a web page at that point.
Okay. Well, this is great. I mean, we really appreciate your efforts on the behalf of making Tri-County more of a responsive organization and maybe getting them to implement solar more.
I
Um,
was able to get it. I was able to get Wise County to reverse their policy because they were doing false advertisement for their membership. And
mhm.
then saying that deferred the cost was actually a better plan for everybody, and they wanted everybody to change to it. So I got the Security Exchange involved, and they fined Wise County Electric from the feds, and they had to reverse their policy and bring back net metering, and then also then offered their customers buyback or overages on top of it.
So
So
do you live in the Tri-County area?
I do. I live in Tri County area, live near Springtown, Texas.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's wonderful. Are you a member of NTREG, by the way?
I was given this information by Jim, another guy, and then a couple other people. But other than me just giving information to you guys and things of that nature. I don't really know much about your group, and I just seen I'm actually like I keep alerts on your group, and I seen this meeting pop up, so I joined it.
Okay. Well, just
Right.
to give you a little background, North Texas Renewable Energy Group is the
Yes,
local, I'll call it DFW chapter of the American Solar Energy Society. And so we try and influence the adoption of solar in this area of the state, and I guess by extension, the greater state overall. And but yeah, we would love to have you as a member. It sounds like you're very involved and very committed. And
yeah,
it's $20 to join, so you know it's not a big ask. But yeah, we would love to have you because that's the kind of advocacy and involvement we like to see from our members.
yeah. I also have the largest solar system in Tri-County Electric. I got 218 panels. It's 64
Oh,
and a half kilowatts on AC, and it's around 90 kilowatts DC.
good
Wow.
grief. That's wonderful.
I use a lot of power. I have a cell phone tower on the property, and I do point-to-point wireless. I'm actually an ISP, and I have servers, and I also do 911 service and everything else. So I burn power like it's going out of style.
Understood. Well, yeah, that's tremendous. That's wonderful. Hey, you know what? You're generating your own power, and that's uh as much as you use, that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, kind of like Michael was saying, we would like to continue this discussion offline and see how we can all help each other. Um, so yeah, and so again, if anyone has any ideas on how we can push along and promote that doubling of the residential solar installations by 2030, you know, let's hear them. If we can use the group chat to communicate on this, and I'm going to try and set up a meeting with uh, the local board chairs of those groups I mentioned that I've been speaking with, and to see if we can start working together, not just on this one initiative, but on other initiatives, including initiatives they may have. And so we have something to work on. So I'm very pleased about it, and I'm going to start talking to people I know at various cities. And again, Michael and everyone that is already implementing Solar App Plus, if you can ask the city down there where you are, or the town where you are, to keep track of how much the expenses are related to implementing Solar App, because that's one thing we don't know. It is a non-zero amount. We know that. We just don't know how much it's going to be for some of these cities. And I know it's going to vary, but I'd like to be able to at least give them some sort of range that it might cost, so that, you know, when they do make the decision, they know they're going to have to spend some money. They'll obviously make it back later on because of the money they'll save on all the staff time. But nevertheless, we need to they need to understand how much they're going to be spending to implement it.
I can tell you that for the city, the initiative is no cost. It's a time cost to get your staff
Right.
trained to be able to utilize it.
I
That's
agree.
really all it is. So if it's 1 man day, 1 man week, you know, that's basically what it is to get it
Okay.
integrated into your system.
Right.
So
Okay.
the cost is actually borne by the to use the system by the installers who are
Correct.
requesting the permit.
Right. Yeah, I know. But I just didn't know how much, and to your point,
It'll be different for everyone. Their costs
yeah, I agree.
ratio as far as, you know, what it costs. You know, it depends on the type of accounting software they're using. If they have a permitting system, you know, if they're going to be independent, you know, there's all that. So like for us down here in Tool, we're just now getting it online, and we've gone through all the process, and we're running independent. We're running it separately from everything else because we didn't have an online system. So
Right.
for small rural cities, it's going to be, a slow process. But that's what we want to be able to do, is be able to say, hey, this is what it took for us to do it, and then we can help the smaller communities. Larger ones like Dallas, the metroplexes, and things like this is a whole different ballgame. So.
Right. Okay. I agree. All right. Well, we can talk about this some more later on. So hopefully Doug is back, and I'm personally thrilled to have Doug with us again this morning. I've always admired your intelligence, and I've appreciated your determination to kind of bring to light what ERCOT and PUC do on an ongoing basis, and the status of the grid and the condition of the grid. And so, we're thrilled to have you this morning. And I'll go ahead and even before your presentation, I'll start with the obvious question. You don't have to answer it right now, of course, but will the grid hold over the next few days or week? I've been following your communications along with Joshua Rhodes, and I get the sense that we hopefully will be okay. As long as we don't just go crazy with our heating or do something nutty. But it looks like it will be a record demand sometime this next week, maybe on Tuesday morning. And but hopefully there's enough supply to handle it. But also I would like to know if you think there's anything that the NTREG members can do to persuade or compel PUC to implement Utilities Code Section 39.919 about improving energy efficiency in Texas. And, frankly, I would like to know, and this is just personal, I would like to know if there's some way that we can get with, I don't know, Encore or some organization that could potentially use bond funding to buy or offset the upfront costs for, say, heat pump water heaters, so that people could convert from gas powered water heaters to electric, but they would have to be heat pump electric, and help with the implementation of that on a aggregate or large scale basis. And I don't know who would do that. I'm just trying to spitball it here and figure out if there's some way that we can work on that along with our other initiative to dramatically increase the residential solar systems in the state by 2030. And again, you don't have to answer that right now. It's just food for thought.
Yeah, no, that's great, Mark. There's like several questions there, and they're all
Yes.
really important questions. So, I just start with what I think was the most important of those questions, which is,
Hey, Doug, hang on a second. Doug, you're coming across garbled.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
All right, let me,
Sounds like you're talking through water or something.
okay. I don't know why that would be. Let me, what I might do is just log out and log back in. Is it still doing it?
Yeah, now that
it's
fixed
good
it.
now.
It's good
It's
now.
better. I didn't do anything, but okay, that's good. If it happens again, please do
Okay.
stop me. I know I get on a roll and I'm loud, but do what you did and jump in, and I can just go grab my phone and call in through the phone if it picks up. But it's good now.
Yes, perfect.
So the most important thing in there, I think, that's all very important. But what can y'all do to help the PUC do the right thing and help them help themselves, help us, right? By implementing what they need to implement, which you mentioned was 39.919. And if for those that aren't following it as closely as Mark is, and thank you for following it so closely, that it was a section of Senate Bill 1699, which was actually a bill focused on distributed energy resources. And we'll talk about DERs once we get into my presentation here. But there was a section that was actually added in the House. I believe it was Chairman Hunter of the State Affairs Committee in the House that added it in with an amendment on the floor. And it got into the bill, stayed in the bill, was signed by the governor. And it says the commission shall implement a goal to reduce average residential load. I can pull up the exact words later on if y'all want. And as I wrote in my latest newsletter, in my latest article, the PUC has a plan for the year of implementing the various pieces of legislation, the various bills that were passed during the last session, and that is not on there. And that often happens. Agencies, people think if something passes the legislature, well, it's done. It's not done. The PUC or whatever agency, you could be talking about Health and Human Services or TCQ or what have you, they've got to carry that through for it to actually mean something, for it to be implemented. And it's not on their roadmap. And I do think they need to hear from the public on this. I think it's very important that people speak up and say, y'all need to do this. As far as the next few days, and what I'll do is I'll answer that question because I know it's on everybody's mind. Then I'll go into my presentation, and then in the Q&A we can come back to the next few days and what that might look like. As of right now, the peak demand is forecast to be just a shade under 85,000 megawatts. The all-time record set in August was 85,500. Right now, they're projecting
Hey,
84,500. Yeah, is it happening again?
Are you showing slides right now?
I can. You want me to? I'm not showing
Well,
slides,
no, I
but I
didn't
can
know
show.
if you're going to do a verbal before you started showing your slides.
Yeah, I'll pull up the slides in a minute, but actually, let me just. Can you guys see the ERCOT dashboard there?
Yes.
Am I
Yes.
sharing now? So, and probably most of you on this call, because you're an educated audience, you guys are probably all familiar with this already. But if you don't mind, I'll just quickly just walk you through like what I look for on this. So, the 6-day forecast is actually super helpful because what I used to do when I was these kinds of systems, whether it's summer or winter or whatever, and there's something coming, I'd have to go into. There's a place where all this load forecast is, and they actually go out 7 days. If you really want to go and find the 7th day, I could show you where to find it. But at least they put on the dashboard the 6 days, so I don't have to go pull up a spreadsheet, scroll all the way down, find the right hour. This is actually pretty useful. I will say that these demand forecasts bounce around quite a bit. So it's best not to get too fixated on this number. This is Tuesday morning. Obviously, we're sitting here 72 hours in advance. It will change, right? Whatever the number is, highly unlikely it's going to be 84, 875. Whether it's more or less, we don't know. If you made me pick, I'd pick the under. I think this is pretty high for the temperatures that they're expecting. But what you're looking for there is where the demand and supply are getting closest. And you can see there's still a little bit of a gap there. A couple of things that are really important, because I know there's a lot of anxiety around these systems. I have a lot myself. My wife is always trying to calm me down. It's going to be all right. But we were without water for 5 days. We had a pipe burst, in Uri. And so I carry some of this anxiety and trauma myself. So I get nervous about it, but I also try to calm myself and calm other people about, and I think that the point is to be real clear-eyed about what's going on here. And so let's be as clear as possible and not, let's all be prepared and not panic. Here's something that I think should give people comfort. Let's say that that the capacity that is available at that time is much lower and demand really goes even higher than this, and those lines cross. And number one, there's still some reserves beyond that. They're still holding reserves out of that number. Number two, if those reserves aren't enough, and they do have to start bloodshed, and I know those are triggering words for all of us. we're not talking about a Winter Storm Uri type load shed. We're talking about maybe 1,000 or 2,000 megawatts short. That gets proportioned, or sort of spread proportionally to all of the distribution utilities. So for y'all in North Texas, that could be Tri-County, that could be Denton, obviously Encore for most of y'all. And then they take their proportional share of that and shed some load. So for each one, it might be a couple hundred megawatts at most. And really what we're looking at here, if you look at 8 o'clock in the morning when it's closest, like look at 7 o'clock, there's a much bigger gap, right? Look at 10 o'clock, there's a huge gap because the sun is up, right? So we're talking about a very short duration and a very small magnitude. Still very serious. We don't want anybody to lose their power for any period of time. But obviously the difference between being out for 30 minutes or an hour versus 72 hours, there's really no comparison of those experiences. So this is a very different system than Winter Storm Uri, and hopefully that gives comfort to people. So if there's anything confusing in there, anybody wants to ask a question, we can do that now, or I can jump into the slides that I wanted to run through with you.
No, we are still experiencing some audio issue from you, a little bit of echoing.
Yeah, right.
Y'all talk about that for a minute. If somebody had a question or something, there's a lot of experts on this call, so y'all can ask each other. Let me just go grab my phone. I should have had it here with me. I apologize. And I'll just dial in so we don't have the audio issues.
Yeah, Doug, while you're gone, I'll go ahead and do the intro for you.
Thank you.
Certainly. So everyone, I'm very pleased to announce that this morning we have Doug Lewin with us. He's the author of the Texas Energy and Power newsletter. His presentation today will cover the state of the energy grid in Texas, the strategies to improve affordability, reliability, and sustainability, and the important impacts a grid transformation could have on Texans' quality of life. So for any of y'all that do not know Doug, he is the founder of Stoic Energy, is based in Austin, and is recognized nationally as an energy expert, particularly in the electric grid, renewable energy, energy efficiency, demand response, utility regulation, and pollution reduction. Doug has led government and regulatory affairs work for CLEAResult, an energy efficiency program implementer for over 250 utilities in 40 states and provinces. He has also worked at the Texas Legislature for 5 years as a legislative aide, primarily on energy, environment, and climate issues for 3 different elected officials in the House and Senate. He has been featured in newspaper articles and TV and radio segments throughout Texas and nationally, including the New York Times and more. Doug earned his bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Texas at Austin. So that right there tells you he's a very intelligent person. So with that, hopefully Doug is back with us online or on the phone, and so we can continue on with his presentation. Are you with us, Doug?
I am. Does that sound okay now?
Oh, very good. Very good.
Okay. All right. Yes. Don't know what that's about. Sorry that's happening, but we'll
problem.
just get through it. All right. So get this presentation pulled up. All right. Can you all see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. So yes, putting the pieces together for reliable grid. And yeah, what we're going to do is kind of talk about, as Mark said, affordability, reliability, sustainability all together. So just quickly, thanks for sharing the bio. I think you talked earlier about the newsletter that I write. It's the Texas Energy and Power newsletter. Encourage folks to check that out. DougLewin.com will take you there. If you don't want to type Texas Energy and Power newsletter into your browser, just DougLewin.com will get you there. This week, I will be launching the first episodes of Energy Capital, a new podcast. I have in the past done the Texas Power podcast, which is Renewable Energy World. I think those episodes are great and encourage folks to go check them out, but excited to have my own podcast coming out. So encourage folks to check that out too. All right. So I like to just kind of use this as a little bit of a metaphor, because when we get into these discussions of reliability, affordability, sustainability, and the grid, and how do we fix the grid and all that kind of thing, that is a natural human thing to want to have one solution. Like, why can't we just do this one thing and it'll be fixed? Like, policymakers, for instance, have really fixated on more gas plants. Like, that'll solve everything. It will not. We have a lot of problems with the gas system. And as a matter of fact, adding more gas plants can, not necessarily will, but can, if not done right, make many of the reliability problems worse. And so I think the key here is to focus on the various pieces of the puzzle. We're going to have to do dozens of things right. There's a saying that I like to use on this one, which seems to work particularly well in Texas. There is no silver bullet. There's only silver buckshot, right? We are not going to have one thing solve this. So we'll get in today into what these different sort of pieces of the puzzle are. Let's actually start with affordability. This is out of your hometown paper, the Dallas Morning News, which has done some great work on covering energy affordability. And man, power prices have been really high the last couple of years, right? 20 is I'm sure lost on no one on this call. 2022 with gas prices being extremely high, 2023 with it being as hot as it was, and so many days of scarcity and some new ancillary services and all these different things going on have led to really high prices. And so this is data from the Dallas Morning News, and as a measure of energy burden, this is how many people self-report having to choose between paying for food, medicine, or energy. This is a choice that, in my view, no human being should have to make. We should be orienting our policies towards energy abundance and cheaper power, so that so that businesses can grow and so that people can afford to pay for their power bill. Having nearly 1 out of every 2 families making this choice is a massive signal that we have a serious problem that needs to be addressed. Reliability, obviously, we had the worst power outage in the history of the United States. There are different metrics for that. The 2003 one and the Eastern Interconnect actually affected more people, but it was for a much shorter duration of time. This was definitely the longest duration power outage. In modern history, maybe there were some events in the very, very, very early days of the electric grid, but call it in the last 80 to 100 years, this was the biggest power outage in the United States. And obviously the effects are still lingering. So we talk about affordability, we talk about reliability, and then we talk about sustainability. So sustainability can mean a lot of things, right? We can talk about pollution, and we can talk about the environment, and we should talk about those things. But I also want to talk about a couple other things in sustainability. This is not sustainable. This is a slide from the ERCOT CEO to the ERCOT board that shows the peak demand on the ERCOT system in the summertime. Now, we could do an interesting one for the winter, but you'd have some dotted lines in here because we don't know what demand was during Uri. ERCOT thinks it was 77,000, which was about here. A team of A&M researchers think it was about 82,000, which would put us, I don't know if I think you can see my cursor there, way up here. There's a team at A&M that just over the last semester was doing some research, and they've put the estimate of Winter Storm Uri at 87,000 megawatts. So we don't know because it couldn't be served. So, people are running models and trying to figure that out. These are all known. These are not disputed. These are the actual measured summertime peaks. And here's what I take away from this slide. Coming into the summer of 2022, the most power we had ever used in a given hour was 74,917 megawatts, so about 75,000 megawatts or 75 gigawatts. 12 months later, leaving the summer of 2023, just a few months ago, we had topped 85,000. So that is a massive, about a 15% increase in peak demand in a very, very short period of time. Yes.
Hey, Doug, two questions. One,
Mm-hmm.
do you want us to save the questions till after the presentation, or can we ask questions during the presentation?
Generally I do, but I'm okay with y'all. This is like, it's Saturday morning. We got some time. It's not like there's a really hard stop on this thing. I'm gives me a chance to sip my coffee. So yeah, y'all jump in when you want to.
Okay, so the obvious question is, what has caused that increase over such a short period of time? And do you think that increase will continue for the foreseeable future?
So this is a great question, and I appreciate it. There's actually a lot of misunderstanding around this. There is an assumption that a lot of people make when they see this, that this is increasing population, that it's an increasing residential load, and it's actually not. And ERCOT has some slides. I don't have it in this presentation, and I could probably find it. I could send it out. You could distribute it afterwards. It was made at some working group at ERCOT. I'd have to go back through and find it, but they do break down where they believe that this is coming from. I say believe, like it's an empirical matter. They can actually, do the analysis and figure it out. And the vast majority of this increase is on the industrial side. Now, what do we mean by industrial? That's a lot of things. Some of it is Bitcoin. And I know there's a lot of strong views on the various sides of the Bitcoin thing, but that is not anywhere near a majority of this. A lot of it is coming from electrification of oil and gas. The oil and gas fields in the Permian are being electrified at a fairly rapid rate. The first Energy Capital podcast that comes out, we got into this quite a bit, that was part of the thing, even in advance of Uri. There's a lot of industrial electrification happening. There are also, there's just a lot more manufacturing going on in the state as we've had this sort of reshoring, right? A lot of manufacturing locating here. More data centers, more industrial, like oil and gas electrification of industrial processes that don't have particularly high heat, where they can get on the grid. And look, a lot of that, why is that happening? What's the name of your group? You're the Renewable Energy Group. It's the growth of renewable energy in Texas, right? It is industrials looking at a very, very large number of hours out of the year where power prices on the grid are $0 or $10 a megawatt hour, under $20 a megawatt hour, far cheaper than burning gas, right? And throughout 2022, in the lead up to these kinds of peaks, the price of gas was $6, $7, $8, even $9, right? It's back down to $2.5. But during 2022, and even before that, a lot of these industrials were making decisions to interconnect to the grid because it was just so much cheaper than burning gas. So that most of this is an industrial story. So there is some residential. There's some increase in residential, but it is not particularly large. And on a sort of a per capita basis, it's actually going down. On a gross basis, there is some increase in residential. But if there is more efficiency getting into the market, mostly through lights and things like that, right? LED lights have made a big difference. But anyway, so yeah, most of this is being driven by industrial. That's the short answer.
Okay, because I spent my career in industrial real estate development, and I hear what you're saying, but to me, it's shocking that industrial development or industrial usage could increase that much in that period of time.
Oh, well, let me, I left out an obvious.
It's about a 13% increase.
Yeah,
right?
there's also,
right.
I'm sorry, just real quick. There's also the heat, right? I mean, like that's a huge part. It was a hotter summer in 2023 than 2022. This was I believe the second hottest and only barely second to 2011. Those of you that have lived here a long time remember that horrible summer. 2023 was basically right on a par. So that's a huge part. So there is a residential increase there from the heat. Sorry, who was trying to jump in? I apologize.
Chris, I think. But yeah, she was saying it's about a 13% increase plus or minus.
Yeah. Which is staggering in this shorter period of time.
Yes, it is.
And to the point of the presentation, it's unsustainable. If we having 13% increases every couple of years, you're not going to be able to really build supply fast enough to keep up with that. We're going to need we're going to need to bend that curve. So we're going to talk about that more.
Okay.
Let's talk about another piece of sustainability, though, economic sustainability, right? This state has for a long time had a very large share of its economy tied to oil and gas, and still does. It is less as a share now than for much of the history of the state, right? We have diversified, and there's a whole lot of industry in the state. So a potential sort of steep decline in oil and gas use around the world, which could happen. I'm not saying it will, but it could, and we'll get into this in a minute, would impact the state significantly. Not as much as it would have, say, in the 1980s when the oil bust happened, right? That's a good sort of corollary. We have a more diversified economy, but we're the energy state, right? We're the energy capital. We have the workforce, both on the engineering side and the financial side, at any side you want to look at, like the expertise is here, and there's something happening in this country right now, and in the world right now. These are some charts from the International Energy Agency that I love to show. This is referred to, right, as hockey stick growth. The electric car sales around the world, the IEA says 3 years ago, about 1 in 20, 1 in 25 cars being sold were electric. In 2023, it was 1 in 5. It's just a staggering growth, and it is not slowing down. It's actually, I wouldn't say it's increasing, but it's sort of staying along that path. Solar PV additions, just an absolutely stunning growth, right? I mean, the vast majority of what is being built is solar, and these days, the vast majority of what's being built is solar plus batteries. Major implications for Texas. So this next slide is a little bit busy, and I'm going to spend a couple minutes on it because I think it is phenomenally important, and I'm super appreciative of the International Energy Agency to laying it out this way because I think it just tells an incredible story. Here's what you're looking at here. So the blue bars, this is the growth. This bar here is the growth rates for aircraft during World War II, the average annual deployment growth, so about 75%. Here's the growth of the Model T in the 1910s. So these are two of the examples in the history of industry, two of the biggest examples of extreme growth, right? I mean, the Ford Model T, right? The thing that created the factory, the assembly line, the sort of model of industrial ingenuity and efficiency, the growth rate was about 35%. Look at EV batteries compared to those. Look at solar PV modules, like in the ballpark of the Ford Model T. Now look below the line. This is the average annual cost reduction. The efficiency they got from the assembly line led to about a 10% average annual cost reduction. World War II, right? The factory of democracy, right? Building up this whole, modern, war machinery, being ready to go for World War II. Just an incredible growth. Even with the learning curve they were on at that point, it didn't quite get to 15%. Look at solar PV, 18%, EV batteries, 19%. The average annual cost reduction exceeds the cost reductions of aircraft during World War II or the Model T in the 1910s. We are living in an extraordinary time. And for those of you that are power nerds, I mean, gas turbines during this time, right? I mean, this was, during the energy crisis, there was a lot of investment going into making more efficient turbines. Solar PV modules in the last decade exceeded that. And again, the cost reductions far exceeded it. All right, so just one more IEA chart before I'll shift just a little bit here, but I think this one tells a very powerful story. The dark blue is international investment in fossil fuels. It was a little over $1.2 trillion in 2015. This year, this was still an estimated number. This report came out during 2023, so it's not actually a final number. But the IEA with pretty high confidence expected it to be lower than 2015 levels, just about but not quite back to pre-pandemic levels, and at a much slower growth rate than clean energy, which is in the light blue bars, which you go back to 2015 was about $1 trillion and was approaching 1.8 trillion in 2023. So when I talk about economic sustainability, there is a huge potential here for Texas. The IEA expects that just based on the announced pledges that countries around the world have made at the various conference of parties, the climate meetings that go on, that this number will double if countries just meet the announced pledges in advance of the last COP, before the last COP. If countries just meet their announced pledges, this number, the clean energy number, will double in the next 7 years. So the question for Texas is, are we going to gain a large share of this? Or are we going to say this dark blue bar is the only place we're going to play? We're an oil and gas state, not an energy state. I think that would be a terrible decision to make. It would have significant economic ramifications. It would slow our gross state product. It would, severely limit the number of jobs that are created in the future. I think, and I'm not saying Texas is going to stop producing oil and gas. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. I think Texas is going to continue to have a large share of this dark blue bar. But why limit yourself if you can get here too? And so there's an economic sustainability story here too that I think is sometimes overlooked. So I've called this presentation "Putting the puzzle pieces together for an affordable, reliable, sustainable grid." So what are those different puzzle pieces? And I just want to launch into this section by saying this is not, as you see in this picture, there's hundreds of puzzle pieces. I'm going to talk about 7 or 8 or 9, not hundreds. There are others. And many of you will have some favorite piece of the puzzle that I've left out. And when we get into the comments, we can talk about that. But I just want to be real clear. This is not intended to be, comprehensive everything, but just to talk about some of the things that I think are needed. And let's start with, as a renewable energy group, let's start with wind and solar. So Texas right now is sitting at a little over 60 gigawatts of wind and solar combined, 38 wind, 22 solar, and another 5 gigawatts of battery storage. This is great. This is a phenomenal success story Texas should be very proud of. We are far and away number 1 in wind. We are now number 1 in utility scale solar, having passed California just this last year. We are way behind on the distributed side, and we'll talk about that as we go forward. But on utility scale, we're now number 1, but it is not near enough. We will need a lot more if we are continue to have power prices go lower and to have a reliable, affordable, and sustainable grid. We still are number 1 in coal. We should not have any more coal on our system within a period of 5 years, maybe even less than that. But it needs to be an orderly transition. We need to make sure we've got enough supply to take the place of those coal plants. But those coal plants are killing thousands of people per year, and that is not pejorative. That is not hyperbolic. There is actually good evidence showing that coal plants do lead to premature mortality, to death. And we have the alternatives to replace it, so we should replace it. We are going to need more transmission. There is no other way about it. We are going to need interconnections to east and west to increase reliability and affordability and sustainability. And we're going to need a lot more intrastate. I am often critical of the PUC for things that they don't do. I also like to give credit for the things that they do. Early in 2022, they approved a large build out of transmission to South Texas, a little over $1 billion. South Texas is one of the most rapidly growing areas for renewables in Texas. There's a lot, it's very windy there, as anybody that's spent any time on the Texas coast knows. It's also very sunny. So this is good for a lot of reasons. It increases the reliability of the valley, which was too isolated. And just like we need to interconnect more to east and west, they need to be more interconnected to the rest of the state. There were very limited connections down there. This is going to change that. So this is good for all of those things: reliability, affordability, and sustainability. I mentioned, I did not mention this yet. I'm very bullish on geothermal. It's going to take a while. It's not something that we're going to see this year, in 2024 in Texas. But I think before the end of the decade, we will see a build out here. And what you notice on the front of this report, which is an excellent report out of UT called The Future of Geothermal in Texas, who does this worker look like, right? It's an oil and gas worker, right? What we are using with geothermal are the same knowledge and skills that are in the oil and gas field, because you are drilling down. And in Texas, unlike in say the Mountain West, in the Mountain West, you only have to get down to about 7,000 or 8,000 feet. That may sound like a lot, but it's actually kind of, I was going to say child's play. I mean, it's not child's play. It's 7,000 to 8,000 feet, but that's, it's a mile and a half. But it's fairly easy. It's fairly cost effective. People know how to do it. These deeper areas, deep ESG, when you're getting down, in Texas, to get to heat that will supply enough power and potentially be cost effective, you've got to get down to about 12 to 13,000 feet, which is lower than most oil and gas drilling goes. So that is why we don't have development yet. We have like a pilot, I think, down in Hidalgo County. There's like 3 megawatts or something, but we really don't have much of. And this is enhanced geothermal. This is where they're actually injecting water. It's being heated up by the heat of the earth, is coming back up as steam, and is turning a turbine. I think we're going to see a lot of this. I think it's a major piece. Why is it a major piece? Because this is what Jesse Jenkins, the scholar out of Princeton, refers to as clean firm, right? This is power that is there regardless of what's going on with the wind or sun. So we're obviously coming into a period of very cold weather coming up. Looks like the wind forecast look pretty good, but there is one period, I think on Tuesday night, where winds are a little lower than they will be through the rest of the period. The sun is going down. That would be a time when you could call on geothermal. No matter how cold it is outside, it's still the same heat, 12, 13,000 feet down, and you can get that steam out, no emissions, all that kind of stuff. So I'm pretty excited about geothermal. A nearer term set of technologies, because they're here right now, they are growing at an absolutely phenomenal rate. As a matter of fact, 3 years ago, when we were, January 2020, January 2021, before Uri hit, we had about 250, 300 megawatts of battery storage. We now have over 5,000 megawatts, an 18x increase in 3 years. This is a core solution. And again, just like with wind and solar, that's great. Can't rest on our laurels. We need a whole lot more of it. There is more coming. There's a huge pipeline of these. We're probably going to double that 5,000 by the end of 2024. And probably increase by another 5,000 in 2025. That is phenomenal, again, for all of the reasons we've been talking about. It's great for reliability, perfectly suited to those periods when the sun goes down, perfectly suited to at the beginning of this talk when you're asking me about what's going to happen the next few days. And I showed there's this brief period of an hour or two where the lines get really close. Battery storage, lithium ion, these battery packs you see pictured here, perfectly suited to that kind of situation. So we're going to need more. We also need long duration energy storage. This is an image. There's a company out of Houston called Cavern Energy Storage. This is their image. And basically you're talking about something like pumped hydro. But again, unlike say the Pacific Northwest or other places where you have huge difference in elevation and you can actually what is called pumped hydro. And what they're doing there is you would use, when you have plenty of power, you would actually move the water up to a higher reservoir, let it flow through the turbine on the dam when you don't have enough power. So you're getting the power, and then back when you're in normal circumstances, power is cheap, you pump it back up, and so the cycle goes. We can't do that here as they do other places, but we can do it in caverns. We have a lot of caverns in Texas, and you can move that water around. This is one example. Form Energy is a company that's using rust. Iron air batteries, they're called. They're 100-hour duration. The point here isn't to fixate on one technology, but the point is to say we are going to need energy storage that can be 8 to 10 hours, and we're going to need storage that can be multi-day. There's a lot of different ways to do this. Green hydrogen is a kind of multi-day energy storage, if you want to think of it that way. I'm going to shift and start talking about demand side in a minute. So this might be a good natural place to just pause and see if there's questions. Did I confuse you at any point? Anything need clarity? If not, I can keep running.
So Doug, oh, go ahead.
Doug, this is Rosa Ornstein.
Hello.
Hi, welcome back.
Thank you.
when you were discussing the deep geothermal, the thought came back to me that there are thousands of plugged deep vertical wells out in West Texas. And I was wondering whether any of those could be repurposed, since they're already probably 8,000 feet down, whether they could be repurposed for geothermal.
It's a great question. The answer, unfortunately, is probably not, and that's only because they have to go where the resource is. And I could pull up later if we have time. It's in that Future of Geothermal report. There's a map that shows where that resource is in Texas, and it actually sort of it's actually more coincident with the Eagle Ford shale than it is with the Permian Basin. It sort of forms an arc along the Texas coast. I guess I'm mirrored, so I should go this way. Anyway, but if you picture the Texas coast, the line of the Texas coast, the Eagle Ford just sort of traces there. There's also some good resource over in east, sort of northeast Texas, closer to where the Haynesville is. But there's not a lot of good heat, even at 12, 13,000 feet in West Texas.
Okay.
It's a good thought, though, and maybe for repurposing some of the, because there's a lot of those wells, obviously in the Eagle Ford and Haynesville as well. So maybe there.
Yeah, the Haynesville has them, but I'm sure, as you know, the rest of them are shallow wells. They're horizontal well drilling, not the vertical type.
Got it. Got it. Thanks, Rosa. It looks like John has his hand up.
Thank you very much. I spent 25 years in Texas, North Texas, and now have the opportunity to work for New York Geo. So I was glad to see on your illustration the shorter geothermal heat pumps. And that's encouraging, because we're doing a lot of that here as much as we can. I'd like you to comment on what you see in Texas as the future of the 500-foot geothermal heating and cooling.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I love the technology. And I think we will have some here. I'm not quite as bullish on it as I am the enhanced geothermal, but who knows? Like I could be wrong. Maybe those 500-foot ones will take over. Let me just describe quickly what that is, and then John, you correct me if I get anything wrong, or just add additional color if it's needed. But so what you're talking about there is going obviously much shallower to like 500 feet. If you go outside, whether it's 100 degrees outside or 0 degrees outside, the temperature, even just a few feet down in the earth, is going to be right at, 60 degrees, something like that all the time. And what you're doing, so with air source heat pumps, which is what most people heat and cool their homes with, you're actually pulling the heat out of the cold air and pumping it into the house. With a ground source heat pump, you're doing the same thing. You're taking that heat out of the ground and pumping it into the house. If it's heat you need or cool, it flows both ways, right? You could take the cool out of the air on a hot day and bring it into the home. But the 60 degrees of the earth is generally closer to the temperature we like inside our homes than the massive variability outside our walls in the air, right? So it's a great technology. Of course, it does take a lot of drilling. So I think as a one-off, it can be pretty expensive. And again, John, you work in this, so you can correct me if I get any of this wrong. Where we are seeing it in Texas is in a community of development here in Austin. It's just sort of in East Austin, just outside of the new toll road 130. And it's a development called Whisper Valley. And they're supposed to eventually, I think when it's all complete, it'll be thousands of homes. And they're drilling a loop for everybody that lives there to get their heating and cooling. So you get some economies of scale. So instead of like drilling 500 feet for just one home, you're drilling 500 feet and then creating this loop and heating and cooling all those homes. I need to get out there and visit that place and learn more about what they're doing, but sounds like it's going pretty well. And the people I've talked to that are out there are pretty happy with it. I talked to a homeowner out there not that long ago, and they were saying it's great, and their energy bills are very, very low. So I think for new developments, it's fantastic. And when you consider that new developments, unfortunately, are still often being put in with resistance heat, which is, we'll talk about in a minute, is causing so many problems on our grid, it could be a really good solution for these new developments.
Hey, Doug, I'm looking at two projects here in Dallas in the LMI communities that are possibly going to be utilizing that same neighborhood geothermal heating and cooling tied with solar plus storage. So there are initiatives. The issue is that the development that's down in Austin is a large development. So when you have a for-profit company going in, they look at that return on investment. Whereas going back into established neighborhoods or smaller new neighborhoods, it's a smaller footprint. And so the return on investment is not the same. And that's the challenge on all of this at the end of the day.
Which is why I'm a little less, bullish on that. It's very hard to go in and do that as a retrofit.
Yeah, you are spot on so many things. I guess I'd add to that yes, geothermal is the most beneficial when you have extreme heat and extreme cold, which we happen to have in New York. And you do have it in Texas.
We have some extremes here.
Yeah, for sure. A couple things. One is that if the IRS allows the third-party ownership, then there could be a utility model for for-profit companies that do help in that retrofit area where kind of like solar now, where a third party can own the equipment and lease it. So if that comes through, it could really be a boom for all over the country for the retrofits. The other thing I'll say, and you may talk about it in the demand, in New York State, we've calculated that if we continue with air source heat pumps as prolific and fast-paced as they're growing, our grid is not going to be able to handle it. And who's going to pay for that grid expansion? But with geothermal, we can cut that to 2/3. So the benefit that state people hopefully are looking at here happens to be with not having to build out the grid at just incredible costs.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, I think if it's all right, I'll just jump back into the presentation because I want to make sure we have enough time to get through. Go ahead, Mark, you wanted to say something? And I'm going to drop a link here, which is I mentioned earlier that I did the Texas Power podcast with Renewable Energy World. This was an interview with Tim Latimer, and we actually started that. Tim is much more knowledgeable than me. He's the CEO of Fervo, which is an enhanced geothermal company based in Houston, and they've got some deals with Google. They're developing in the West. They aren't doing anything in Texas yet, but he's a Houston guy. He wants to do Texas. We started that one he went into the different kinds of geothermal from heat pumps all the way through to enhanced geothermal with a few things in between. So if you want more on that, I think that's if I may say so, I think a really good place to go. Mark, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I wanted to read a couple of geothermal related questions before you get off of that. This is from members. I'll just go ahead and read them, and you can just, I guess, answer them individually as I read them to you. One is geothermal heat suitable, i.e. hot enough to repower existing thermal plants?
To repower which plants?
Existing thermal plants.
Thermal plants. I don't know. I don't know if you can use the same equipment. Like intuitively, I would think so, because you're talking about turbines and turning turbines with steam, and that's what thermal plants do. But I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
What I will say is, if there's a power plant that is located where there's a good geothermal resource, you can, just like with solar and storage, like you're seeing this a lot of places, you have large infrastructure at that plant, right? You have big transmission tie-ins and stuff. So generally, yes, and you have a Department of Energy and a loan program office that is hyper motivated to help do those kinds of repurposing projects. I don't know whether you could use the same equipment. You can certainly use the same site. Yeah. And by the way, there's a great story in Texas, the green hydrogen that's in production, not too far from y'all, right? In Wilbarger County, not super close, but not too far either. The Oakland Union coal plant that had closed, they're using that infrastructure to make green hydrogen and use that grid tie there. So we're going to see more and more of that. You got that transmission infrastructure there. That's one of the biggest barriers to building a power plant. So if you can repurpose it, all the better.
Okay, good. Susan Alvarez asked, can you do low head hydro? I'm not even sure what that is.
Susan, you want to jump in and tell us what you mean? I'm not sure I understand. She may not be in a place.
I have to get unmuted. So in the past, I've done some projects where they used low head hydro, which is not dependent on having a huge hydraulic head driving the turbines. It's based on putting an in-stream turbine, if you will, that basically takes the energy from base flow and converts it into power.
Is it this like the run of the river kind of a thing where
yes.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, I mean, I think you could see some small applications there. I have not heard anybody who's actually like working on that in Texas. There is a Hydro Trade Association. A guy named Malcolm Wolf runs it. At least he did as of the last time I checked in with him. If there's anything going on, they'd probably be covering it at their website, but I haven't heard anything.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Phil Timmons asked, since geothermal still has the major cost of steam management, plus large turbines, plus generators, plus step-up transformers, plus transmission, how can it compete with simple solid state, no moving parts, silicon solar PV, which is cheaper to install and then just sits and produces electricity for the next 30 years?
Yeah, and I can tell from both from the question and from the answer you gave to Rosa, Phil, that you know a lot about this topic, and you're right. It's a huge challenge. That's why we're not seeing geothermal development right now. Well, there's other reasons too. The resource is better in the West, and folks are developing out there. Look here, I think here we get into some bigger questions of market design and how resources that can produce. Again, in those times when what is often being referred to now as net peak, which is, we have our peak, which is what was shown on that ERCOT graph I showed. But really, that number, as solar becomes more and more of a phenomenon here, as we approach 40 gigawatts by 2026, over 20 already, gross peak, particularly in the summertime, becomes not that big a deal. And we already saw this. This is like postcard from the future was August and September this year, where the conservation calls weren't at 4 or 5. They were at 7 or 8, right? Mm-hmm. And some people will say, well, solar's a problem because the sun sets. Like, no, solar's not a problem because the sun sets. Somebody commented to me on Twitter the other day that after all these years, solar still can't figure out how to produce at night. And I was like, that's got to be sarcasm, right? Please tell me that they were kidding.
Yeah.
Yes, after 4 billion years, the sun still doesn't shine at night. That's true. And it's probably not going to, if that's what your hope was. So we do need some market mechanisms. That's where like long duration energy storage, and frankly, geothermal acts as a kind of long duration energy storage, because when that steam comes up, and Tim Latimer got into this a lot in the discussion he and I had on that podcast, it doesn't have to be released at the time it's produced. You can actually store it underground and wait until it's needed and then have that steam come up. So that's the thing, is are you compensated for that? In the current market, you are compensated for deploying at scarcity. Is that enough of a price signal? Because what's going to start happening with solar, Phil, to your question, yes, it's cheaper, but the revenues associated with solar are going to drop with each passing year, right? Solar starts to kind of cannibalize itself a little bit. And we're already seeing that with $0 prices for many hours during the day. But then you might have $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 per megawatt prices at 7 or 8, like we did this summer. So can geothermal get a hold of that? And are the investors comfortable enough that those prices will continue to be there into the future, that they can cash flow a 30, 40 year, asset and investment? So there are huge questions there that obviously, I can't answer. Everybody's trying to figure that out. And a lot of that is just regulatory uncertainty. What is the market going to look like in 5 years? What's the market going to look like next year, this year? There's huge changes happening all the time. So, yeah.
Thank you. So Larry Bentley also said, with enhanced geothermal, As you inject large quantities of water, does it run the same risk as fracking of small earthquakes? And I'm no expert, and I'll let you answer, but I think it probably does not, simply because when you're injecting processed water, you're pushing it into the earth under huge pressure, and you're leaving it down there. Whereas geothermal, you push it down, but then it comes back up as steam relatively quickly. Is that accurate?
My very limited understanding is it is not as much of a problem in geothermal. It's not zero. It can be mitigated, but I am absolutely not an expert in seismicity and drilling, so I'll just stop there.
Okay. I'm not either, so I'll stop as well. And then so then there's some other discussion, but I don't think there's necessarily questions directed.
Cool. Why don't I keep running ahead with the slide? So
Okay.
I think this next section, I think y'all are gonna really like. And so when we're talking about what are the pieces to put together, so far we've only been talking about supply, right? Wind and solar and transmission and sort of large scale, enhanced geothermal. We talked a little bit about demand side with the geothermal loops, but generally we've been talking about really big stuff and adding supply. But of course, there is another side of the equation, and that is, you've got the transmission part of the grid, and you got the distribution part of the grid. You've got supply and you've got demand. This study, I think, doesn't get nearly enough attention and really should be talked about often. It was out of the Pacific Northwest National Lab, and they looked at if we had something called a distribution system operator. And basically, that's just a fancy way of saying, like, you have ERCOT, which is a transmission system operator. They facilitate and match supply with demand, right? So you can think of ERCOT, as kind of an air traffic controller, but kind of an air traffic controller that's a market, right? So ERCOT doesn't own power plants. People get mad at ERCOT for not having enough power, and they take some share of the blame, but certainly not 100%. I don't even think even a majority when there's a lack of supply. They don't own the power plants. They are the one that are matching the buyers and the sellers and coordinating all of it. Who does that on the distribution side? Right, where we have already several gigawatts worth of solar on roofs and a couple hundred megawatts of battery storage in garages standalone on the wall. We're up to about 15, 16 gigawatts. And by the way, that's roughly equal to, I think the whole DFW area is like 20. So we're almost up to a DFW worth of power just in vehicles, just in light duty vehicles in Texas. And the 250,000 light duty vehicles, if you just do the simple math of each car is about a 60 to 70 kWh battery and you times them together. Now, you can't get all that power at one time. And there's, a lot of people like to say, well, that's not really the way it works. Fine. But there is 15 to 16 gigawatts of power rolling around on four wheels. And that's just in the very early days of this hockey stick, right? That is going to increase by leaps and bounds. Who is coordinating this? Who is coordinating what's going on the distribution system? And what they did was they said, what if we had somebody coordinating all that? We had markets where people were paid for the value that their solar, their storage, their demand reductions brought in. If we were doing that, putting money into consumers' pockets, helping to buy down the cost of the systems they want to get on their house to increase their own reliability and affordability, it would save the entire ERCOT system $3 to $5 billion every year. So even if you didn't participate, even if you were somebody, and nobody on this call fits in this because this is the Renewable Energy Group, but if you're one of your neighbors, like, I'm not interested in this, I don't want solar panels, I don't want battery storage, I want an ICE vehicle, an internal combustion engine, I don't want an EV, they would also save money if you, their neighbor, were doing this stuff, if it were coordinated in a way to reduce costs. So what does that mean? Like, how would you actually do that? What are we talking about here? So this is actually, they look back at 2016, but you could look at just about any year or these are days. These are particularly dramatic because it's summertime, right? But if where we started this conversation when we were looking at that ERCOT graph, you can see this in the wintertime, you can see it in the summer, these sort of camel humps, or I like to call them roller coasters, right? We're on a roller coaster of valleys where people are not using very much energy. We get all the way down to 30, 40 gigawatts, maybe on a colder time, it might be, 45, 50. And then these peaks right? And this is 2016, so you only see 70. But you saw that ERCOT presentation I had. We're literally off the chart now, right? We're over 85. These peaks have grown. This is a key fundamental point I like to make whenever I'm talking about this stuff. Growth of electric demand is good. Let me say it again. I'm as much of an energy efficiency advocate as anybody around. We want to use more electricity. Transportation is the easiest way to think about this. It is more energy efficient to have an electric vehicle than internal combustion because you're wasting all that heat generated by the gas-powered engine or diesel-powered engine is lost. People don't think about this very much, but the power that moves your car delivered by that internal combustion, the energy is not power, the energy from the car, when you go back to the wellhead, to the inefficiency of that, the heat being wasted in the car, you're getting about 30% of the unit of energy that's actually useful. And electricity, that spikes up. It's not 100%, but it's pretty close to in that 70, 80% efficiency kind of a range. So it is energy efficient to use more electricity. We were talking about why those peaks got so high. I was talking about industrial electrification. That's good. More electric, because that means they're not burning gas. And often, not sometimes in the industrial, they capture the waste heat and use it, and that's great. Often they're not. They're just venting that heat and it's wasted energy. Electricity doesn't do that. So we want more electricity. We want in general, but what we want is for that use to happen in these valleys. And even up close to the peak, even when you're close to the peak, there's plenty of power. It's just at these peaks that we really have the problem. And so with a distribution system operator, what you're doing is you're coordinating all sorts of different resources, whether they be batteries, whether in a vehicle or on the wall. Some of you were talking about, Mark, at the beginning, the heat pump water heaters, right? If you have an electric water heater, heat that water here in the valley. Mm-hmm. We are heading into this cold snap where we very well might have rolling outages. Again, I don't think we will. I think it's a fairly low probability, but it's not a zero probability. And if there were to be outages, there's a lot of people running their electric hot water heaters during the time of the rolling outage. Why? Because we don't have a distribution system operator to coordinate that and have those electric hot water heaters get a signal. As long as Amory Lovins likes to say, people don't really care about the electric grid. They just want cold beers and hot showers. You don't care when that water gets hot, as long as it's hot when you turn it on, right? So let's heat that water when we have plenty right here. And what this shows is if you're doing all these things, you're cooling homes when you have plenty. That requires insulation so that you can pre-cool, keep that nice cool air inside on a hot day, keep the hot air in on a cold day. You can pre-cool or preheat, so you're using less. If you do all that, you see these valleys coming up. Great, that's cheap power. Most days in Texas already, and going forward, it's going to be more. That's $0 energy cost because we have so much wind and solar. This is cheap. Let's use more during these times. Let's charge those vehicles. Let's heat that water. Let's run our pool pumps. Let's cool our homes. Let's make green hydrogen. I could go on. There's a lot of uses for electricity. Let's use it all here and use less here. And if we do that, we save $3 to $5 billion a year. Here's some good news. Texas has actually got a really good start. We're actually a national leader in this, even though it's only a pilot program. There is a pilot program, and that is more than more states can say. I think, again, we cannot rest on our laurels, and I think it is the proper role of groups like North Texas Renewable Energy Group to push the PUC and ERCOT to get beyond a pilot, and not just, NTREG, but folks like myself that talk about this stuff all the time and all sorts of different groups. We need to be pushing into that next, because I've been around the industry for a long time. When you read my bio, you said I was at CLEAResult. Like we worked with utilities, we would see pilots all the time. Here's a pilot, and we've learned all these things. What's next? It's done. There is no next. They do the pilot and it goes away. We can't allow that to happen. This pilot needs to grow into a much bigger offering to customers. And what these pilots are doing is actually paying customers that bring their Tesla Powerwalls in this sort of first phase, but it can be other batteries. And in the first Energy Capital podcast that's coming out this week, we talked a lot about this. You can actually start to get to aggregating thermostats, aggregating hot water heaters, pool pumps, all these different things can be aggregated to have demand reductions. So it can be an injection of power into the grid from solar and storage. It can also be a reduction. And so these they call virtual power plants are underway. It's a cap of 80 megawatts. So far, they've got like 13 to 14 megawatts in. That's pretty small scale, right? When we're talking about gigawatts, so we're talking about like 0.1% or less than that is the cap of what could be done under this. So we got to get beyond a pilot and get into the mass market. One other piece of good news, just this last week, just after the new year, ERCOT put a filing in and said they're basically, I'm paraphrasing, but they're basically saying they're okay with these virtual power plants earning revenues from the ERCOT Contingency Reserve Service. This is a new backup reserve that cost $1 billion in 2023. It's a huge source of revenue for aggregators of the distributed energy resources, and more importantly, for the homeowners and small business owners that want to get paid to reduce their demand or inject some of their own supply into the grid. Just a couple more slides and then I'll stop for questions. I should have updated this one before. This was in December. You can go and look at this if you Google, Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities. Probably many of you are familiar with this, but they update this maybe not on a daily basis, but something like weekly. We're right at about 250,000 electric vehicles. I mentioned this earlier. When you times that by an average battery of 60 to 70 kWh, we are up to that 15 to 16 gigawatts. That is a very big deal. It's a big deal for a couple reasons. One, where was I saying we're having the problems in the summertime? It's not 4 or 5, it's 6 or 7. When do most people get home from work? 6 or 7. If they get home and everybody charges up their electric vehicle at the same time, we're going to have problems. But the inverse is true. If we have smart charging software and people plug in and their default setting is to wait to overnight when it's very windy and power prices are very low, A, they're going to save money, B, we're going to increase reliability of the grid. Just charging the vehicles at the right time is a huge step. The next step is vehicle to home, right? So that the Ford F-150s, they are marketing this as a battery that can be connected to your home, and they've partnered with Sunrun. It costs extra to have. You do have to upgrade your equipment, your breaker box, and have a special inverter to be able to do this. But it's not, again, if you can participate in these kinds of pilots, and hopefully soon, not even a pilot, just in the market, the cost of doing that interconnection comes down because you can then recoup some of that money you spent by bringing the value of that battery. In this battery, in this Ford F-150, by the way, this is standard, a 98 kWh battery. The average home uses 20 to 30 kWh per day. So you literally could power your home with no reduction at all, not even just talking about critical circuits, but your whole house without doing anything different for 3 full days. The upgraded version of the F-150 has a 130 kWh battery. Oh. That is right? I mean, 8 of those on a street is a megawatt. I mean, these are huge, huge batteries. But we have to be able to coordinate all that. So again, the first step is charging it at the right time. The next step is then powering some of the things inside the home with that battery. If you have the connection, it doesn't only power your home if the power goes out, it can power your home just when you come home, you plug in, it gets a signal from the grid. Oh my God, prices are $2,000 because it's 6 o'clock and it was 110 degrees today. Power your own home. So you take your demand down from that, 5 or 6 kW peak down to 0, potentially. That's vehicle to home. You're not even talking about vehicle to grid. And then the next step is actually injecting that power, which the virtual power plant pilot is doing with Tesla Powerwalls, but could be done with car batteries too. And then you're actually exporting that resource into the grid. So a lot of people jump right to that V to G, and I always like to go through those steps. Like those first 2 steps make a huge difference. Just charging the cars at the right time makes a very big difference. Okay, last but not least, before I end the presentation, I have to talk about this because we are heading into this, these very cold days, and we're going to see demand spike. Why is demand projected to get to 85,000 megawatts? Does anybody know what this picture is showing?
Resistance heater.
It is a resistance heater. Does anybody know how many homes in Texas are heated by what is essentially the same as a toaster oven sized to heat an entire home. How many homes? You want to guess? Some of you have seen this presentation before, so you already know.
7 million.
There's about 6 or 7 million that have electric heat, and a little more than half of those have resistance backup heat. 3.5 million homes will use, in these days when we're at a 14-degree day, and you guys in North Texas, unfortunately, are about to drop below 14 degrees, but at 14 degrees, and this shows this, -10 Celsius is 14 degrees, those homes will use 2 to 4 times as much power as the same home on a 100-degree day. So the dark ones are showing cooling, and most homes are getting up to around 5 kW at 100 degrees. When you're using your heat pump to heat down to like 32 degrees, which is the way most of these are designed, you're using 5 kW there. Then you're using another 5, 10, 15, some houses 20 kW just for the backup heating. This is a major problem. FERC and NERC in their definitive post-URI report said, ERCOT, you have to get better at forecasting demand from backup heating. And I think that's why we're seeing these numbers so high heading into this, these 85,000 megawatts. They didn't used to project that high. Before URI, they didn't project that high. And I think they have taken the FERC and NERC recommendation. And this graphic was in the FERC and NERC report. This is figure 108. It says figure 108. That's in the Winter Storm URI report. So ERCOT needs to project it better so we understand the load, but just understanding it is one thing, reducing it is another. We need to start replacing this resistance heat with cold weather rated high efficiency heat pumps while we're increasing insulation. Because there's two problems: inefficient heat and poorly insulated homes. And if we only do the heat pumps, we can actually make the problems a little bit worse. Maybe not worse, but we wouldn't really be solving the problem. Having that, I like to think about when I'm talking to, you guys aren't a general audience, you guys are sort of into this stuff. When I talk to a general audience, I like to talk about insulation. Just think of it as your thermos coffee mug. Think of it as your beer koozie, right? It's the same for your home. You wrap that home in insulation. You're keeping it cooler on the hot days for a longer period of time. You're keeping it warmer on the cold days for a longer period of time. So we need to do that. So how do we do that? What kinds of technology we're talking about? Highly recommend folks look at this report. I can drop a link to it in a minute here. This report was done by the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. And they said in this report, the graphic actually comes from a Wall Street Journal article, but they were taking data from the report. If we were to replace electric, and this is the other thing, a lot of people are like into the electrification and replacing natural gas, and that's fine. I support people doing that. It's great if they want to do it. The bigger impact for Texas is actually electric to electric, because that's what's driving our winter peak is the inefficient electric. Again, 60% of homes, which is way more than most states. Most states are 30, 40%. We're 60%. Just doing the electric to electric switches with the Energy Star. So they got to be efficient, cold weather rated heat pumps, and then doing the attic insulation and ceiling, focusing on that insulation piece. We could reduce peak demand by the end of the decade. This is if we had started a year ago, by 11 gigawatts by the end of the decade. We could reduce 1 to 2 gigawatts every year. So when I showed that peak demand of 85, and when I talked about that's unsustainable, this is how we reduce it. There's also huge benefits in the summertime because these heat pumps heat and cool. Notice they do get into the water heater stuff and smart thermostats. They get into all this. They get into EV charging in the report. This Jinju Lee from Wall Street Journal, the writer, did not put everything that was in the report here, but she put some of the things that make the biggest difference in winter. And I love her the way she called this an obvious, affordable fix. Again, in keeping with the theme here of the puzzles, I actually don't think this fixes everything, but it goes a good part of the way. There is no one thing that will fix everything. We need to do a lot of things right, but this goes a good part of the way. So what does this cost? Now, this next graph I'm going to show only takes into account the cost of the heat pumps, and we do need to do some insulation around it. But what I did was I wanted to compare. The state has put so far $5 billion, and will likely in the next session put another $5 billion of taxpayer money for incentives for new natural gas plants. $10 billion. That $10 billion is supposed to, we don't know that it will, but is supposed to get us about 10 gigawatts of supply. Now, again, you saw that peak. We're up more than 10 gigawatts over the last 14 months. So even if you get that 10 gigawatts, if we continue to grow at that rate without doing energy efficiency, that's a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. That doesn't solve our problems, right? But $10 billion taxpayer money, that's a lot. Teachers didn't get a pay raise. $5 billion could have given every teacher in the state a pay raise. So do we really want to spend $5 billion on that? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. But we should always compare. We should put demand next to supply, do a comparison. If we focused on cold weather rated high efficiency heat pumps, how much would it cost to reduce demand by 10 gigawatts instead of adding supply of 10 gigawatts? Here's the cost comparison. $500 million for cold weather rated heat pumps. This is basically paying the entire delta of what the cost of a low efficiency heat pump that somebody would get just off the shelf when something breaks, they need to replace it. I just call up a contractor, say I need something quick. The average equipment that's only going to heat down to 32 degrees and resistance heat will kick in after that. Paying the delta to the cold weather rated high efficiency heat pump, this is what it would cost. So customers would then have a choice. Encore would tell you, hey, here's an incentive. You can get the low efficiency one that'll cost you a bunch of money and make the year round, right? Every year for the next 10, 15 years while you use that equipment, you'll pay more because the energy cost is higher to serve that inefficient equipment. And you'll contribute to grid unreliability. Or for the exact same cost, you could have a high efficiency piece of equipment. You'll pay less year round. You'll be doing your part to help the grid. Which would you rather do? Same cost. It becomes an easy choice for people. And this is what that costs. Here's what the gas plants cost. Over $10 billion, right? So the cost comparison, there's really no comparison there. It's obviously far better to focus on the demand side. The legislature passed this bill. They passed a directive to the PUC, but the PUC, again, has not even begun to implement it and doesn't even have it on their roadmap to begin. So that's it. There's a lot of pieces of the puzzle. There's a lot of pieces that weren't in here. There's a lot more pieces of the puzzle we need, but that obviously is a lot. Here's my information, where to find me. Here's where that Texas Energy and Power newsletter is at douglewin.com. The Energy Capital podcast, if you go to that link, there's nothing there now. By Monday or Tuesday, there will be. So check that out. And just one last thing. Most of what I publish is available for free. I do have paid subscription levels, and the archives are available to paid subscribers. If you're not already, and I know many of you are already paid subscribers, thank you. If you would like to become one, I would greatly appreciate your support. It helps me to do more of this kind of work. But if you are in a position, say you're on a fixed income and your energy bills are really high and you're having to choose between your, God forbid, between your food and medicine and your energy, and you just can't afford that, but you would like to read this content, just send me a note at this email and I would happily give you a complimentary subscription. If you can't afford it, I do appreciate the support. And with that, I'll stop and we can do questions for 15 minutes or so, or whatever folks want to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. We very much appreciate this. And, I'm thinking, maybe I'm just thinking out loud here, but we as an organization, as a group, can really use your information, because you have a lot of great information here. And frankly, it's just almost too much to absorb in this sort of short time frame. And so what I would propose, and again, I'm speaking off the cuff here, but if there's some way that this organization can get a subscription to your newsletter in exchange for, we will just make you a member of the organization so that you can be aware of what we're doing and our communications internally, and maybe help each other out that way.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Let's figure something out. I like that idea.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'll circle back with you directly then, and we can figure that out. And secondly, that last slide you showed really gets to the point of the legislature not really doing the right thing for the grid. and you know, for a small fraction of the cost of building all those new natural gas plants, we could achieve the same or better results for the grid by energy efficiency improvements. But if the state isn't going to do it, is there some entity, some organization that we could talk to that could maybe use bond funding to pay for the delta between, you know, regular HVAC system and a heat pump system for people that need to replace them and that can't afford it themselves normally?
So I don't know about bond funding. I mean, there could be there's creative ways to get at this but I will say, Mark, there's a couple of things under the Inflation Reduction Act that will be a major help for this, right? So there's tax credits for those high efficiency heat pumps. The tax credit, that section of the code, and I'm not an accountant. You know, here's all the disclaimers. Go to your accountant for tax advice. But 25C is the section of tax code. It existed before the Inflation Reduction Act. But my understanding is it limited you to something like $500, and it wasn't per year. It was just like once. You get a $500 tax credit. That's it. Now you can go up to, I think it's $3,000 a year, might be two to 3,000 somewhere in there per year, and you can do it every year. So if this year you decide, hey, my HVAC is like on its last leg, I don't want to wait till it breaks and then have to make a distress purchase. Why don't I look into getting one of these cold weather, rated heat pumps? You can get that tax credit on that. And then in the next year, you can say, oh yeah, that insulation stuff's really important. And this room feels drafty. Let me get some insulation. It's hard to do insulation in the walls. Not impossible, but the attic insulation is one of the easy. The point is you could do this year after year and take the tax credit every time. Now, again, back to the point of affordability, roughly half of the population doesn't have a tax burden. They're the same folks that are struggling to pay their energy bills can't access that tax credit because you do have to have a tax liability in order. It has to be subtracted against something. And a lot of folks don't pay income taxes. They don't make enough money. It's not quite half. I think it's like 40% of the population. For those folks, there is $690 million over 5 years allocated, the highest allocation of any state out of the Inflation Reduction Act for Texas, 2 programs called HOMES and HERA. And that will be implemented by the State Energy Conservation Office. So the Inflation Reduction Act put the implementation with state energy offices. My hope is that groups like North Texas Renewable Energy Group and many, many others will work with SECO, the State Energy Conservation Office, the Public Utility Commission, ERCOT, anybody that wants to be involved in this, because the states have leeway to design those programs and to really laser focus it on 3 things: the cold weather rated heat pumps, insulation, and ceiling in general, right? But insulation generally, and smart thermostats. So there's some control over that. Because these, by the way, I didn't even mention this, but when we're talking about VPPs, the virtual power plants, the lots of little sources that add up to a big power plant, the new cold weather rated high efficiency heat pumps, some of which are being manufactured right here in the state of Texas, by the way. Harris County has a Daikin manufacturing plant where they're manufacturing those in Texas. They have inverters in them. They can respond to a signal. Unlike the old heat pumps, like the one I have outside my house, which is like 10 years old at this point, on off, 100 or 0, that's it. These are like continuously variable transmission in a car. They can move up and down and they can respond to a signal. So if the grid is getting close to the edge, you can say, oh, that machinery that was running at 100%, bring it down to 90%. Everybody inside the house still stays cool. Everybody's safe. But if you do that across a lot of air conditioners, you might be the difference there between the grid going into rolling outages and some people losing power completely in the heat or the cold, and that's dangerous. That could be the difference between that and people having 90% of their cooling power. And again, if you've got good insulation, you're not going to feel that at all. Your house is going to keep that warmth inside anyway. Mm-hmm. So the tax credits, the homes in HERA, those are a couple ways that will be major ways. And there are the utility programs. While they are small, our per capita is less than half what Oklahoma or Arkansas spend on their programs. So not even compared to California or Massachusetts or something like that. but just compared to Oklahoma or Arkansas, we're woefully deficient. But Encore does spend $40–50 million a year on incentives, and there are heat pump incentives. So I encourage folks to look for those, and you can package those together with your tax credits if you have a tax burden. So there's a lot that can be done, and I don't mean to suggest that that I realize now, like looking back at this, I probably need to put a slide in there that just says, "Hey, Inflation Reduction Act is here, and you can actually access this stuff." So I appreciate the question. There's a lot of ways to get at this. And we need the state to do more to make it easier for customers to afford the more efficient equipment. I'll say one more thing on this. Somebody put it to me this way, and I just love this. That backup heating is cheap, right? So it's still going into new homes. If you're a new builder, you can put in that backup heating rather than paying $1,000 or $1,500 for the more efficient HVAC. You can get strip heating for like $200. Put that into the home. The cost for the capacity, if you're building natural gas plants, to serve that $200 strip heating can be like $15,000.
Yeah.
But the home builder, that incentive, right? There's no connection there, right? That's the problem of the power grid. That's the problem of the developers. The home builders trying to drop that price as low as possible. They're going to put that $200 strip heat in every time. So there is because a lot of people say, well, if these are so great, why doesn't the market just solve it? There's an example of a market failure, $200, and now all of us have to pay $15,000 to serve that $200 investment.
Right.
When we could have all supported a $1,000 and avoided the $15,000. So, all right, I'll stop.
Well, and the other thing, the tax credits under the IRA are transferable, which in my mind helps bring liquidity into the market, because then if you can find investors that are willing to put up the money for the tax credits, then that defrays the upfront cost of these people that don't have that much money to begin with.
So you may know, I'm not sure, the solar and wind and storage, and by the way, the IRA is now technology neutral. Any carbon-free, any greenhouse gas emission-free resource,
right,
including nuclear, gets the production tax credit or investment. And in this case, it's production tax credit because they're already producing. So in 2023, the nuclear plants in Texas were getting. So when you hear people say it's unfair, it's only for wind and solar, not anymore. It's now tech neutral. Those are transferable, 100% sure of that. I'm not sure about the home efficiency tax credits, if those are transferable or not. I don't, maybe I don't.
I don't know. I thought all of it was.
It's a great question. I need to look into that, because if they are, you're right. You could then bundle those together and transfer them to somebody who has the tax burden, but I'm not sure about that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Also, and I don't want to monopolize the Q&A session here, but can you provide us with additional information on how we can best bug PUC and ERCOT to make the energy efficiency improvements that they're supposed to be working on?
Yes. And I would frame it differently. Obviously, I don't think you are bugging them. You are their constituents. They serve
Right.
you. They are
Yes.
public servants.
Yes.
And they have a duty to listen and consider your input. And they should take that very seriously. And I think this commission, to their credit, I think they do take that seriously. I'm pleased to report. I don't think there's only 3 right now. We don't know who the next 2 appointees will be, but based on these 3, I can tell you they all take that. I've seen evidence of that. They take that seriously. There's a couple different ways. Every public utility commission does have a meeting, now has a public comment period. So there is now, and I should be able to find a link. Maybe somebody can do it since I'm talking. If you just go to the PUC or just Google PUC Office of Public Engagement. There's an Office of Public Engagement. They have 3 employees that wake up every day. Their job thinking about serving you. I hope they do. That's their job. I think I know some of those folks. They're earnest people, and I think they take that very seriously. So they can help you. You can say, hey, I hear there's a public comment period. I want to speak. How do I do that? There is also, because of a change in law, your legislators thought it was important that you should be able to speak on any individual agenda item. So if you look at the agenda and there's something on there about distributed energy resources or renewables or whatever, you can speak on that individual agenda item. So before they start each one, the chair says to the person who's running the meeting, hey, so-and-so, do we have anybody signed up to comment on this item? Every single time they say that. I've yet to hear one where they do. Sometimes in the public comment period, people speak. You can put comments into the docket. I encourage you, if you're going to do that, to spend some time reading other comments. Get used to the tone. Like any other place, the PUC has its own culture and its own sort of norms. And I do think it's important to understand those, but I don't think you need to you also shouldn't be intimidated. It's okay to put comments into a docket in whatever form you want. But I do think it helps to just get a little bit familiar, read a few sets of comments and see how it's often done. And that, by the way, is in distinction to a lot of other states. I've worked in a lot of states on regulatory over my career, and most states require you to have a lawyer to put in comments in a docket. We do not have that here. Anybody can put a comment into the docket that would like to do it. So those are a few different ways. Also talking to your local electeds, whether they be county commissioners or city council people. There's a lot of Inflation Reduction Act money available to local governments. The climate pollution reduction grants is one example. There's all sorts of them. The Solar for All. I know Dallas County was involved in a proposal that Harris County put forward as the lead, but Dallas County was in it. Encouraging those folks to pursue everything they can, and of course your state legislators that, hey, great work on Senate Bill 1699. The PUC isn't doing anything about it. You might want to let them know. By the way, that bill was authored by Nathan Johnson from Dallas. So many of you will have him as your senator. As far as I can tell, they aren't implementing the bill he passed.
Okay.
I've got a quick question.
Question I have on with VPP program and everything else, and I've been very active on trying to get that with our particular co-op to implement that, is PUC and the co-ops and everybody else keeps saying that this is a brand new thought process across the board, when load management for large industries has been in the field for at least 30 years on cutting back and paying these big organizations to cut their power, like maybe a factory or things of that nature during the peak. What is the difference between the VPP program and load management in that aspect? Because I don't see it.
I think you're right. I mean, there are differences. But you're right on the fundamental point. I mean, you can get into the weeds and get into some technical differences. For instance, the really large ones are participating at transmission voltage. That is a huge difference, actually. But the principle, you're absolutely right. A load reduction is a load reduction. And as a matter of fact, most of these peaks are not being, I just said earlier, the peak is being driven by industrial. But if you actually look at, and I actually have a slide on this. Sometimes a picture's worth 1,000 words. I'll just pull up this slide. It is critical that we get residential into these programs, because the peak is actually being driven by residential. Can you see that slide? So this is from 2018. 2018, there was a polar vortex event. Actually, yes. 2018, it got very, very cold in Dallas, 15 degrees. Fascinating to see that ERCOT load was 66 gigawatts, and we're looking at probably cresting 80 in a couple of days here. It's really kind of wild to look back on this. But look where that demand is coming from, right? Now, this has changed since then, and we are seeing a lot more large commercial industrial with Bitcoin and data centers and so on and so forth, like we talked about earlier. But still, somewhere around half of that is being driven by residential. And there's a summer version of this that looks the same. So not only are you right on the principle that a load reduction is a load reduction, actually there's more load reductions to be had on the residential side. It is a wider pool of possibility. The challenge is it's a lot of smaller sources. With the commercial industrial, you have a few really large ones, and you can kind of push a button or make a call or whatever. Some of this is still really old school. They literally still make calls on some of these things. They literally still pick up the phone and talk to a facility manager, which is wild. That stuff still goes on, and at least in 2023. But most of it is now moving to being automated. And because of that automation, we should be able to do this with the small commercial and the residential. And that's what that distribution system operator, that VPP, is all about. You have that kind of control. You can push a button and you get all these small resources. So you're absolutely right. There are differences, but the principle is the same. And residential absolutely should be able to get some of that value, earn some of that revenue, just like the largers. There's no reason, why a Bitcoin mine operator can be paid millions of dollars and small commercial and residential customers can't. And by the way, in fairness, the Texas Blockchain Council, which is the industry association for Bitcoin, they publicly support that too. They say, we agree, small customers should get this too. There's no reason why it should only be large. So
yeah, I mean, because like my co-op, my power company, they easily lost millions of dollars just on I think it was about 100 different customers that I was actually able to do the calculation on. They lost millions of dollars just by not doing load management and promoting this. I mean, they could have just easily called us and said, us solar customers, hey, can you cut back on your usage like tremendously and show a positive pushback to the grid and give us a particular portion of that pie, and they could reap the benefits on that end. I mean, that's how the power company went out of business, is because it was the total opposite, where they were pulling too much at the peak during 2021.
You are so right. I want to, and what is your name? I'm sorry, you show up as like connecting, and I don't think your name is connecting.
Yeah, my first name is Steven. Last name is Roy. I was the one that got I spoke earlier. I don't know if you caught on earlier today. We got on.
Yeah.
But I was the one that.
No, I love that. And you should, your co-op, right? Don't forget, your co-ops you're the owner, right? So
Right.
do get involved. I should practice what I preach. I live in Pertinalis, and I should get more involved. But the co-ops were built on this, member, in democracy. Stephen, I do want to. I'm going to drop this in the chat. There was a filing that I will write about. This will be the subject of a upcoming article in Texas Energy Power newsletter, and hopefully a podcast as well coming up. But Bandera Electric Co-op testified at a winter preparedness workshop at the PUC and said they were starting to help their customers get batteries, I think on some kind of a leasing model. And they put a filing in after that. It was just before Christmas, so a lot of people didn't notice it. But Bandera Co-op is doing this. So, we're social animals, right? All of us, and co-ops are no different. It is very hard to get that first mover. We have a first mover in Texas. I'm really excited Bandera is doing this. They should be celebrated and applauded for taking this step. And I think that other co-ops will feel more comfortable. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
CoServe is doing the same thing too.
CoServe, can you send Stephen? Can you send me information on that?
Yeah, I can email you. I got your contact information when you plaster it on that one slide. I can email that information to you too.
I love it, because even better than one of them doing it is if two of them are doing it. That's great. And you're so right. Like this isn't about them. Like when I was talking about sustainability, this is economic sustainability for them. This is for the future of the co-op, just from a financial point of view. Forget about any of the energy transition issues or global warming or environment or anything like that. Just based on their financial interest, they should be doing this. It's actually crazy for them not to.
Yeah, and they could have done it with me, because I mean, during the summer, I'm producing back around 400 kilowatts a day, pushing back to the grid. And right there, I mean, I'm the one of their largest customers, and they should be taking advantage of that. They don't take advantage of that. And that's $50,000 a day lost on their part. I'm just like, you guys are stupid.
Yeah. Hey, Doug, this is Michael Fladmark. It's the co-ops in the state of Texas are one of the largest, most powerful energy lobbying groups there is. And the thing is that you're right. The advantage is that they're owned by their users, really, and they're supposed to be nonprofit, but the users have become silent. And so management has just been able to control it for decades, right? As far as this type of moving forward with renewables and improving and saving costs for, all their members. And so this initiative and the initiatives of, like Pertinalis and Bluebonnet and others, that, it's a small start, but it needs to happen because, they're a regulated market. And so it's easy for them to do this versus, say, working in the deregulated market of ERCOT, right? So, or
Well,
Encore.
they're not in a regulated market, they're in an unregulated market because of Chapter 41 of the Public Utility Commission.
Well,
They
don't operate under the same rules that we have to up in Encore.
So let me just add this is a fascinating discussion, and you're both right. So they look, and I want to paint with too broad a brush here because every co-op is different, right? And some of them are better than others on this, but many of them, and I'm not speaking about any particular one right now, but many of them have over the years made it extremely difficult for their members to participate. Some of them do not publish even when their elections are happening, and you can't find that information on their website. That is wrong on so many levels, and it needs to stop. If any co-op is doing that, we need to start publicizing it and making sure people know it. They cannot do that. I don't know whether it's technically illegal, but I got to imagine it is.
No, I believe it's statutorily illegal, but the thing is that we need to start being the squeaky wheel and getting out there and exposing these bad habits.
But let me address the other point. These co-ops, depending on where you are, if you're outside of ERCOT, it's different. If you're inside of ERCOT, the co-ops appear to ERCOT as 1 meter. They are effectively just like a large industrial customer. And that means half of the co-op's bill, the transmission part of the bill, is determined by how much power they use during 4 increments in the summer. The 4 increments for 15 minutes where we're at the peak. So that 85,000 in August, however much your co-op was using during that 15 minutes when we set that peak, that is 1/4 of the transmission bill, which depending on how much they pay for energy could be around 1/8 of their total bill that is passed through to customers. So if they're doing what Bandera's doing and aggregating batteries and bringing that peak down, they are saving money for the entire co-op. Right. And the inverse is true. If they're not doing it, they're costing all of you money. So they do participate in the ERCOT market, again, unless you're talking the East Texas co-ops, which are, some of those are in, and you have some that are outside of the boundaries and are in SPP or MISO or whatever. But most of the co-ops are within ERCOT. And if so, those price signals that exist for industrials to participate in all these demand response programs exist for them too. The same holds for all the munis, by the way. If you're Austin Energy, CPS, New Braunfels, you guys are all North Texas. Denton, they appear to ERCOT as 1 meter, and they apportion that transmission cost to them based on how much they're using during those periods. So Stephen is absolutely right. It is crazy for them to not be doing this stuff, and it is just utterly rational from a financial point of view for them to be orchestrating these distributed resources and reducing their peak.
So let me interject here. We're getting close to the end of our time frame here, and I want to be respectful of your schedule, Doug. So let's just have a couple more questions here. Glenn, I think you wanted to ask a question, and so go ahead.
Yeah, my question was, what about time of day metering for residential customers, the pluses and minuses?
Great question. I think we need it. I'm a strong proponent of it. I think it should only be for those that want to do it. I don't think we should ever mandate it. If people want a flat rate, they should be able to have a flat rate. But I think for folks that want time of use, particularly if you have solar, storage, electric vehicle, or some combination of those things, actually solar by itself, you may or may not want it. If you have any kind of storage, or if you're participating in some kind of demand response program or pilot or whatever it might be, it can be very beneficial to have it. So I'm a big proponent of it. You can get time of use rates in the competitive market. So if you have TXU or Reliant, and you're somebody who's not in a co-op like we were just talking about, you're able to shop, I would encourage you to look at some of these upstarts. Tesla has its own retail electric provider, Ohm Connect, Octopus, David Energy. There's a bunch of them. As you guys learn about more, let me know. I'll start saying their names in those lists. And the big ones, NRG owns Reliant. They're starting to do some of this. I don't think they're as good as those others, and they own a huge coal plant in Fort Bend County, and for other reasons maybe don't deserve the most conscious customers' business. But you can shop and you can get time of use. The problem is the time of use you're getting is only on the energy portion of the bill. The transmission distribution part, which makes up a fairly large portion of your residential bill, something like 40%, depending on what your rate plan is and all that kind of stuff, there's no time of use associated with that. And I think we need to start moving that. I think we're going to need to start getting the T&Ds to have, because they should be charging very little for people to charge up their cars at night, right? Not zero necessarily, but like 1 or 2 cents, right? There is some cost to use the grid, but it's you already have the grid built. There's not enough demand during the night, right? You should be incentivizing people to use power then and charging more during these times when we're in great scarcity. So I'm a big proponent of it, but we're going to need some pretty major changes, even though the competitive market affords some opportunity there. Without change on the T&D side, that price signal is very, very muted. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm on Garland Power and Light, so I'm on a co-op, but I think I may communicate to them and suggest at least we have an option available for us. But
yeah,
thanks.
and I would just in like the high, if you're doing like Maslow's hierarchy of needs here in your work with the co-op, I would put this one a little further down. It's important and you should talk about it and socialize the concept and see if they've thought about it. But like you're probably after some more like basic, like, I mean, I don't think what Bandera is doing is basic. It's really, really hard to do that, but they should be doing that. Like they can, the opportunity of co-ops to just directly help their customers, which are their owners, right, is just enormous. And I would look there first, because these rate design issues, they're going to want to hire consultants and they'll do years of study and like, hey, can you just help me get storage in my garage? So I'll let you control it for some of the time if you do. It's not easy, but I think it's easier than rate design. I could be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
So Doug, let me ask a couple more questions that are on the chat. And I hope you can see that obviously there's a lot of connection between what you do and what we do here. And we'd very much like to somehow figure out a way to be more integrated together with you and what you do with what we do.
No, I love you. Y'all are my people. I'm having fun. These are, I love talking about, as you can tell, I love talking about this stuff.
Right. So Dan Lipinski had 3 questions, I guess one of which has somewhat been answered. But the other 2, do you see any legislative or other movement toward implementation of mandated net metering in Texas?
No, I mean, we were really close in 2009. We almost had net metering. The bill died at the very end of the session, and there really hasn't been a concerted push since then. And frankly, I don't think, I should be careful how I say this. Like, I mean, I think, let me say it this way. I think that the market structure we have could do a lot more to bring solar and storage and the EV batteries, whether it be vehicle to grid or even just managed charging, to bring all of that and the other stuff we talked about, thermostats, all that stuff, bring all those suite of technologies in. Our competitive market has the ability to pay for that value delivered in a way that is superior to net metering. It effectively looks like net metering, but it is more precise and more targeted to the actual value. When I was saying the VPP pilot is going to bring the ECRS, the ERCOT Contingency Reserve Service, you can actually get the money from the ECRS for the VPP. That was $1 billion in 2023. Like if you can go and get a share of that money for your battery, you'll see, and some of y'all are probably part of this. People that are part of the VPP pilot often will post their, like, the screen grab of how much money they're making from the market from their VPP on it. Like in August, people were posting this, like, I got paid $40 today. I got paid, like, the market signals that are there in ERCOT right now are strong signals. Like these $5,000 megawatt hour days, you can earn a lot of money. I do think there are other things that need to be done to align the price signals on the T&D side. We were just talking about time of use. There are things like that. We're not, you know, and the VPP thing is still a pilot. It's not a mass market thing yet. So we still have a ways to go to prove this out. But my thesis, and it's our hypothesis, right? It might be wrong, and I'll readily admit that. But I think that the ERCOT market structure affords much better opportunities to earn revenue and earn revenue that are directly connected to the value to the grid than net metering. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like we could talk for an hour just on that topic, but like we'll leave it there for now, and then in the fullness of time, maybe we can. That might be something maybe I should write an article about too.
Okay, perfect. The last question is, do you have any legislative connections that can influence implementation of PACE at a residential level throughout Texas?
Residential PACE is a real sticky wicket. That's a tough one. For those that don't know what that is, property assessed clean energy, we do have a robust commercial and industrial PACE program. In fact, they're nearing $500 million in investments in energy and water saving technologies. But we don't have residential PACE, and the track record with residential PACE has not been great. Again, this is a topic in and of itself. And I would say, again, if we're plotting out things that have a potential to make a big impact in the near or even medium term, residential PACE wouldn't be particularly high on my list. Simply because we have these IRA incentives, we have a VPP pilot, and a set of commissioners that seem pretty interested in expanding it. I just think there are other near-term opportunities that can make a much bigger impact.
Mm-hmm.
And the other problem with residential PACE is no matter who you get into your coalition, generally the mortgage bankers are going to rise up and kill it.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I don't know, like that is the biggest problem is they have experience with residential PACE in other places and they don't like it.
Okay. And that makes sense. I understand. So a couple more, hopefully short questions. I hate to keep loading them on you like this. But is there a specific group within the Attorney General's office where you can file a complaint against any not-for-profit entity which is not following the rules?
I don't know.
Okay.
I assume you're talking about like a co-op that's not following their rules and publishing their member elections or something.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer.
Mark, this is Rosa Orenstein.
Mm-hmm.
I posted that there is a group within the Attorney General's office that specifically oversees trusts and nonprofit organizations. And you go to them and all you have to do is go into the Texas Attorney General's website.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a group that focuses on nothing but that. And I've been involved with them with other entities that were not following the rules. So I know that exists, and I was posting that as an affirmative statement. I guess it didn't come out that way.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you, Rose.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I'm glad you know the answer because I don't. So
yeah, I don't either. So final question is, if the spot price is negative, do the generators pay ERCOT?
Yes.
Really? Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that. That's a great question then, Eric. I never even thought of that. So
yeah, and a matter of fact, we had negative prices yesterday. Some people make negative prices out to be a really bad thing. I don't see it that way. They're negative right now. If you go to the ERCOT, here, I'll share the screen. And here's why that happens. So this is on the ERCOT dashboard. If you go to the main page, you see 3 tiles, and then it says, click here for more. And if you click here for more, this is the one in the far bottom right. So any given time. So I mean, literally like this is in the VPP world, right? I mean, here's another opportunity. If you've got an electric vehicle or you've got a battery on your wall, you can actually get paid to charge it. Now, there's the transmission distribution fees, right?
Mhm.
This is just the energy portion of it, right? So doesn't quite work this way. But if you take your electricity transmission voltage, you can get paid right now to use power. And I think we're going to see more and more of this. And some people make this out to be a bad thing. So I guess it's a bad thing if you're a generator. If you view the world from the lens of a consumer, this is pretty nice. I don't see why any policymaker in Texas who is representing consumers would say this is a bad thing. This is great.
Right.
Pay customers to use power. Can you imagine if we have a large number of days a year where this is happening? What does this mean for manufacturing in the state of Texas? Every manufacturer in the world is going to want to come here.
Yeah.
Free power. And by the way, remember what I told you about transmission voltage and the co-ops? And if you're taking a transmission voltage and you're not using power during those 4 increments in June, July, August, September, if you shut down your operations, you can get your transmission bill pretty darn near zero as well. I mean, Texas is the place probably in the world where you can get closest to having a $0 energy bill. If you're a variable source, because I think we're going to see more and more days like this, we could have a manufacturing renaissance in the state if policymakers don't screw it up. Which, a lot of people saying $0 energy prices are terrible for the grid. Really? Looks pretty good to me.
All right. I agree.
I mean, anyway, it's obviously a more nuanced discussion than that, but we're over time already. But they will. And the reason that happens, right, is if you get the production tax credit. And again, don't let anybody tell you wind and solar is subsidized and everything else isn't. Nuclear is getting that too. So you're getting paid $23 a megawatt. If you're a nuclear plant right now, you're getting $23 a megawatt hour to produce. You're having to pay ERCOT 7. You're still getting 16.
Gosh. Yeah.
And that's true for wind, solar, nuclear. That is true for any carbon-free source. It is tech neutral now. It is not just wind and solar.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's interesting. I know we've gone over time, and I apologize for that, but it's been an extremely interesting conversation. And I think that NTREG and by extension Texas can help you and vice versa. So I'll figure out what we need to do to make you a member, and then if you can, we'll figure out some way that we can get your newsletter as an entity. I know I'm a subscriber, as I think you mentioned some of these other people are as well, but I think it'd be better just to get it as an entity, and then we make you a member, and then we can have better communication than this once a year or twice a year when we manage to talk you into making a presentation to us.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, let's talk about it and figure it out. And this has been a pleasure. You guys are doing great stuff, and this was a fun conversation. Great questions. And
it was very fun, very interesting for us too.
So is it cold up there already? Did you guys get I'm in Austin, so it hasn't reached here yet. I got to go wrap my plants. If you haven't done all that stuff, here's your last public service announcement. Outside faucets covered up. Get the plants good and wrapped. What do they say? I'm trying to be a good citizen here and parrot the messaging. The National Weather Service, the Texas Department of Energy Management, is the 4 Ps: people, pipes, pets. Let's go pets second. People, pets, pipes, plants.
Yes, there you go.
Check on your medically vulnerable neighbors and family. Wrap those pipes. Make sure your pets are indoors, and go ahead and wrap up those plants as well. So if you haven't done it yet, in a couple hours maybe, right?
Yeah.
Well, what about antifreeze?
Yeah, antifreeze. Yeah, make sure your car has antifreeze in it too if it's outside. That's exactly right, Glenn. Well, hey, Doug, thank you very much, and we'll let you go get your plants wrapped and everything taken care of before the freeze hits. And I'll be in touch with you individually.
Sounds good, Mark. Thanks, y'all. Appreciate it. Have a great
Thank
day.
you.
Thank you,
Doug.
Thank you, all, everyone.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you.